No, friend. I'm charging you for all of the stuff that you don't see. What I bring to the table, my experience, my education, my expertise.
Originating from deep inside the Rocky Mountains, transported through the power of the internet, and arriving inside your tiny earbuds. It's the Appraiser Coach podcast, helping appraisers increase their efficiency, quality, and make more money. Here's the guy who makes it his life's mission to create value for real estate appraisers nationwide. Your host and the Appraiser Coach, Dustin Harris.
If you're not on YouTube, you're missing something big because I just got mocked by my wife. I know that's not new, but she said, nice outfit. 30 years of marriage, and I guess we're allowed to do that. I want to tell you a story that you may have heard before, or at least maybe you have heard a version of this story. The version that I first heard was of a submarine engineer and maintenance, but the real story comes from the legend of Henry Ford. And Ford was having a problem. This was a major problem in one of his factories. It was a generator problem. And he got his best engineers on this problem and called in engineer after engineer, and none of them could figure this thing out. The problem was this was a big enough issue that it was shutting down his entire operation. So Ford was very anxious to get this thing fixed. Finally, he called in a guy by the name of Steinmetz. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but he was an electrical engineer and very well known in his field. And Steinmetz came in and he listened to the machine for a minute, and he scribbled down some calculations in a notepad. And then he asked for a ladder, climbed the ladder, and he made a small X with chalk on a very specific section of this generator. He climbed down from the ladder and he said, I want you to remove the plate that I put the X on and replace a specific number of windings from the coil at that exact spot. They did, and the story goes that the generator sparked to life perfectly and Ford was back in business. That is not the end of the story. A couple of weeks later, a bill came in the mail for $10,000. Now, $10,000 was a lot more money at that time. I mean, a lot. That was a small fortune. Now, Ford, being a bit of a penny pincher, he's been described as, asked Steinmetz for an itemized bill, an itemized invoice. So Steinmetz replied to this request, and the itemized bill said this: making Chalkmark, $1. Knowing where to mark, $9,999. I want you to let that lesson sink in for just a little bit. And when we get back, I want to talk about what it means to be a professional. I want to first remind you that professionals use principles, and principles mean tech. Technology helps us to do more with less, folks. And the technology that I absolutely love, because it saves me time on every single report that I use it on, is TrueTracks. TrueTracks is a program that allows you to define a neighborhood, to define boundaries, to understand the ups and downs, that you're not just randomly checking the increasing, decreasing, or stable check marks because you actually know what's going on in that neighborhood. It allows you to import comps and make adjustments in such a manner that, well, folks, it will save you 30 to 45 minutes on every single report that you do. When you look at it that way, right, it goes back to the lesson that we're being taught today about Henry Ford, right? Give me the invoice all day long on something that's going to save me 45 minutes per report. You can learn more by going to TrueTracks on their website. It's truefootage.tech/tools, truefootage.tech/tools. And by the way, when you check out, make sure you use Appraiser Coach, a capital A, capital C, one word, Appraiser Coach at checkout, and get 6 weeks. I kid you not, 6 weeks for free. Working RE Magazine is where I go to find out more about my profession of choice. My profession of choice, of course, is appraisal. And they get it when it comes to professionals. They're working RE for a reason, working real estate, folks. They understand working professionals like you and I. And you need to sign up for their free newsletter. It comes out a couple of times a week, full of great information about what's going on in our industry. Again, it's workingre.com, workingre.com. All right, folks, welcome back. Today we are talking about value, and more importantly, we're talking about perceived value. It's different than actual value, but folks, that's where the money is made. The money is made with perceived value, not actual value, and stick with me on that, right? Certainly, professionals bring to the table real value, as in the story with Henry Ford. The engineer that came in gave him real value, but the perceived value was not there until the invoice arrived. And I think this is something that we deal with as professionals on a regular basis because, well, let me give you an example. Have you ever had the experience, and I know you have because you're an appraiser, right, where you go into a property, you meet the homeowner, you do the quote unquote inspection or observation or whatever you're calling it, the walkthrough, you measure the outside, you take the photos, you take all of the data, you go to the front door, go through the walkthrough on the inside, you look at each room, you make your notes, but let's be honest, folks, you're not there more than 30 minutes, right? Let's say you're there 25 minutes and you're on your way out the door and you say, well, do you have any questions? And have you ever had this question? So how much did you get paid for this? Right now, the question is, how much did you get paid? The real question, what they're really asking is, holy crap, you must have a really cool business where you can come in for 25 minutes and make $600, right? The perceived value is different than the real value. Now, I often, in that instance, because I do get asked that on an occasional basis, that or, so what's it worth, right? You're walking out the door and it's, as if you know the answer to that question as you're walking out the door. Like that really is all you're bringing to the table is what they see, right? The only thing that was brought to the table in Henry Ford's eyes was this check mark. You paid, you're charging me $10,000 for a check mark? No, friend. I'm charging you $10,000 for all of the stuff that you don't see. What I bring to the table, my experience, my education, my expertise, right? And as an appraiser, I think that we somehow forget that, right? When I do a high-end home in Jackson Hole, for example, I think that people hire me because they understand that. They understand the professional level that it takes, that you can't just hire an appraiser from Joe Blow six-pack appraisals and expect that the typical fly-by-night appraiser is going to be able to come in and truly understand and properly value a $25 million estate on the Snake River, right? So the perceived value, the actual value, okay? I once had an underwriter. In fact, it's been more than one time, but specifically I remember because I remember the underwriter very well. We became good friends afterwards. But on one of my first assignments, the underwriter said, no, how do I become an appraiser? Right after I had completed an assignment in about 2 days. And I did that on purpose to impress. It was a new business, a new client for me, right? And we had the setup to run these through in 48 hours and still do an excellent job, right? But it backfired somewhat because their perception was, holy smokes, how much did that Chalkmark cost me, right? Now, this goes to so many things in our lives, right? But as an appraiser, I think we're dealing with this on a regular basis. The value that we bring to the table sometimes has to be education, helping people to understand, not to toot our own horn, not to tout ourselves in our bio necessarily, but sometimes we have to, right? Sometimes we have to say, yeah, I know what you're actually, when you say, how do I become an appraiser? What you're really asking is, boy, you did that really fast and got paid a lot of money for that. That must be a pretty sweet gig, right? Let me explain what actually went into the process a little bit. Even then, they're not going to fully understand, but folks, we deal with this on a regular basis. Recently, I had someone call me out on Facebook, and it's not the first time, right? But I had said something about coaching and doing something with appraisers. And this individual said, I'm tired of people trying to profit off our profession. I think it was an exact quote. Well, I could have let it lie, and I probably should have let it lie. But to me, it was perceived value versus real value. So I professionally responded back and I said, with all due respect, I had a successful appraisal office long before I started coaching other people. And I will also say, if your perception is that I'm only trying to profit off of the profession, I guess, I'm not going to change your mind on that. But I would encourage you to maybe look through a different paradigm, that maybe the value that I come to the table with is something that people understand as being a true value. It is only for those who see the value in it. What I do, folks, is not for everyone. In fact, I would say that my appeal is to less than 2% of all appraisers, even people that listen to this program on a regular basis. By the way, this individual indicated that she had listened to my program, and she said, I appreciate your podcast. I've enjoyed listening to it over the years. Okay. We had a nice conversation to follow up. But the perceived value up front may not be the real value. But folks, my average attrition rate in the All-Star team is 3 years. Okay, that tells you something, especially when the first 30 days are free, right? If you're not getting the value, you've got 30 days to cancel and you owe nothing. But yet people stay around for an average of 3 years in the All-Star team or the Dream Team. Again, I don't need to justify what I do, right? I help appraisers to become great CEOs. Many appraisers are wonderful appraisers, but they're not great CEOs. And I teach principles and practices that turn your 60 plus hours per week and paycheck into and living a paycheck to paycheck to less than 20 hours a week and not quite FU money, but okay, getting close, right? By the way, the value that I bring to the table speaks for itself. If you question that, go to Google, right? Go to my Google business profile and read the testimony. These are all actual, true, real testimonies from people who I think have been blessed by what I bring to the table. And again, it's not for everybody. My job today is not to justify my value, right? People find what they're ready for, right? But the idea today is to understand our value, what we bring to the table, okay? When someone says to me, I'm tired of people trying to profit off of our profession. Can you imagine an underwriter saying that to you as an appraiser? Right? It really upsets me that we have to even get an appraisal. What are you trying to profit off of the mortgage process? I mean, most of us would get defensive, right? I'm not defensive. I hope it doesn't come across that way. What I hope comes across is an understanding of where we are as professionals. More importantly, not necessarily to the outside world, not necessarily to Joe Blow homeowner, not necessarily to the realtor that we might be involved in and who sees us as a speed bump along the process, but to ourselves, because we have to understand who we are before we can help others to become who they are. By the way, speaking of value, we are finally able to bring to the table the Elevate Appraisal Retreat for 2026. We had to, for purposes of security, at the time we were headed to Puerto Rico in February, folks. And if you remember what was going on in the news in Puerto Rico, it was not a good situation with the military buildup, and we had to push this off. But not to be derailed, we have reestablished the Elevate Retreat with Blaine Fine and myself. Will be held this fall in November in Sedona, Arizona. We are so excited. Go to my website, TheAppraiserCoach.com. Wait a couple seconds and there will be a pop-up. If you are interested in being one of 10, or initially we're just going to open up 10 seats for the Elevate Appraiser Retreat. We've already got 2 of them filled and I haven't even announced it yet. So there are 8 seats left as of this recording to the Elevate Appraiser Retreat, 3 days, Sedona, Arizona. If you've not been, I hear it's magical. I've never been myself. Super excited to bring this kind of value. By the way, speaking of value, I would encourage any of you who are considering this, I would encourage you to just to click on the website and just listen to the testimonials that were taken at the end of last year's retreat in Coors Gold, California. I promise, folks, if you listen to the people who were actually there, who spent time and money to be there, I think that the value is there. We hope to see you there. Thank you for joining me today, folks, and go create some value.
You've been listening to the Appraiser Coach podcast with Dustin Harris. If you like what you hear, please give us a 5-star rating and post a short review on iTunes. For more in-depth insider information on how you can make more money as a real estate appraiser, visit TheAppraiserCoach.com and sign up for the All-Star team today. Thanks for joining us. And now, get out there and create some value.